Well, we're back again to talk about aviation. You've got Paul Brennan here in Wellington. And where are you, Martin?
I'm still stuck in Melbourne.
Stuck.
Hmm.
Oh, dear. Looking forward to coming back, huh?
I'm actually, yeah, I've had enough of working in Australia.
I don't think you should fly Singapore Airlines A330s, though, if you're going to come back.
Yeah, no, interesting, isn't it?
We're talking about one of these very rare situations where, and if you're on the plane, you'd really know about it because the noise reduction would be so noticeable when both engines flame out. Have I read that right?
Yep, both engines turned themselves off at 39,000 feet, and after losing 13,000 feet, they managed to get them restarted again.
So what do we know about this? Is it weather-related? Is there some external cause that's being talked about? Because I'm thinking back to BA, the plane that almost crashed completely at London. There was the Malaysian Airlines 777 that experienced, power rollback. And I think it was the heat exchanger in the fuel system that caused that. What do we know about this one? What are they saying?
Well, according to the newspaper reports I've read, it lost both engines during the cruise while flying through a huge storm in the South China Sea.
At that altitude?
Interesting, isn't it? Yes, which makes me question the 39,000 feet. But there again, if there was a huge storm at 39,000 feet, it would have been sucking in ice. So maybe that was the cause of the problem.
Oh, okay. So rather than liquid rain.
Yeah, well, at 39,000 feet, it's going to be sort of minus 40 no matter what happens, I reckon.
Totally. And one remember when they were trying to extinguish the engines of that Qantas A380 that had the explosive event? They were firing a fire hose into that thing at full pressure and couldn't stop it.
No, but taking in a few cubic meters of ice a minute or a second, I'm pretty sure that would gum things up. It would just starve it of air, wouldn't it?
You would know that you're in those sort of conditions, you'd think.
Yes, you would expect to know that.
Yeah.
It's all conjecture at this point. We don't really know.
Just maybe have been a very unique set of meteorological circumstances that all sort of came together at once.
And they say once they restarted, they flew on and it was fine. Everything was fine. There was no anomalies at all, according to the crew.
Yeah. You'd be hoping to be able to restart, wouldn't you, on the way down?
That would have woken them up.
Yeah.
And a very interesting picture in The Guardian, one of those very useful newspaper pictures. So the headline is Singapore Airlines jet plunges 4,000 meters after losing power in both engines. The next line mentions an A330-300. Then they have a photograph of two aeroplanes, one of which is an A320 and the other one's a 777.
Accurate as ever, eh?
Yeah, amazing, isn't it?
It's moronic, almost, the level of error there, the rate of it anyway. And
you don't have to be an enthusiast to want to get that right, I would have thought.
Well, it would just be a search in a database, wouldn't it? You'd say A330, please,
Yeah.
And bing, there it is.
Yeah.
I don't think people make the effort, Martin.
Up to the usual standards.
Yeah, okay. And you certainly would have known about it if you're a passenger on that plane because, well, for a start, if the weather conditions were bad, you would be experiencing something from that. But, when the engines stop, the noise goes away.
Yeah, it would have got very quiet very quickly.
And that's a horrible silence. I remember interviewing the captain of the BA aircraft that went through the ash cloud over Indonesia. And that's one of the comments he made, that you're just not used to hearing the aircraft that quiet.
Yeah, just wind noise.
And it's eerie. It's really eerie, So, all right, well, they got it restarted. They carried on and they lived to tell the tale. That was a problem for passengers. Another problem for passengers, Martin, you may not have heard in Australia yet, was that one of New Zealand's best-known businessmen and former politicians, raconteur, commentator, column writer, Bob Jones was...
After that lead up, everyone knows who he is.
Yeah, no surprise. And Lower Hutt's most famous resident, Bob Jones, was thrown off Air New Zealand flight 421 Auckland to Wellington on the Wednesday morning. Apparently, he was seated in one of those rows by the emergency exit, and I think you require, don't you, a separate briefing for that, and you've got to agree to help people in the event of an evacuation. Well, I can just imagine, Bob. I've experienced Bob Jones before, and I mean, he likes to have a few wines. I mean, I know it was early in the day, but you never know. And he's the sort of guy that if he doesn't want to do something, I think it'd be pretty difficult to get him to move. And it's obviously escalated to the point where he refused to have anything to do with the safety briefing. Things escalated, and he was marched off the flight.
Chucked him off.
Apparently the captain, he's quoted as saying that it doesn't matter who you are. So it sounded sort of like they're trying to make an example of him, maybe. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're not, safe to fly, you will be taken off the aircraft. Question is, and this is something we can think about, flight crew and aviation security are known to be officious at times. Would that be the word to use?
Yeah. That's
they can be a little over the top sometimes, and
yeah.
And you get the impression now that post 9/11 that airlines' policy really is if they cause any trouble, get them off. Doesn't matter if they're right or wrong. But, I mean, I can imagine that Bob could be maybe a little cantankerous. He's in mid-70s now, and, of course, he's famous for hitting that reporter who tried to land a helicopter near where he was trout fishing, and he thumped him in the face. And there's a famous bit of footage of this reporter with his nose bleeding on camera. And little funny aside here that I was reading today, in court, Bob Jones was fined $1,000 for assaulting this journalist, and he asked the judge that if he paid another $1,000, could he hit him again?
And one thing about Sir Bob Jones, he quite enjoys getting a bit cantankerous as well. So once he's in it, he's really into it, and he'll go for it.
Well, he's the sort of guy who will push back against officiousness. I think he had a run-in with the Ministry of Transport years ago too over a speeding ticket that caused a few problems. He wasn't. I think he got pulled over without any reason, and he pushed back against the officer, and it sort of escalated and became a court case.
Of course, if I was a person of Sir Bob's means, I would have a PC-12 to fly me around New Zealand.
Well, he used to have a Hawker 125, Hawker Siddeley 125. Yeah.
Right.
Back in the 80s. Personal jet. It had, I think it was ZK RJ something,
Oh, yeah.
But they sort of went out of fashion after the share market collapse,
Okay.
as things do. But that's been in the news, and whether you like Bob or not, he's definitely a character.
He's good value.
He can make you laugh, that's for sure. I've had a few chats and raves with him over the years, and he can be very funny.
I went to a dinner where he was once, and he was very amusing.
Don't ever have a beard around him.
No,
he doesn't like beards. He always used to complain about bureaucrats and people, who got in the way. They used to describe them as grey shoe wearers, because there was an era back in the 80s where sort of bureaucratic types wore grey shoes. It was the fashion. So he was big on that too. But anyway, poor old Bob. That would have been entertaining to see that. Well, what happened, though, is it delayed the flight 20 minutes.
Not really poor old Bob, if we're honest.
Well, no, not poor old Bob.
Poor old other 150 passengers in the plane, I think.
Yeah. Oh, well, it'll be interesting to hear his reaction over the next few days. I'm sure that will be...
It'll be a good column.
Reported. Obviously, Martin, not a member of Air New Zealand Elite.
No, and probably never will be at this point.
Now, this is interesting. This is something that's just surfaced over the last few days or so. It's like a sort of secret little society that you can be only invited to join. And, you never know where the lounges are. They're hidden away.
I think it's actually quite a New Zealand-ish, actually. Lufthansa's got it as well. They have a thing called, it's the Black Club, and you get a black card, and it's super invite only.
Right.
And politicians and sports stars and everything. So New Zealand's obviously decided to follow that. There's about 100 members, big business people, a university vice chancellor.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Sports people, but you have to bring, if you're a businessman, I think your company has to bring like $1 million a year within
New Zealand.
So probably of the 100, 93 or so will be Fonterra people.
Yeah, well, that's another story. They're facing a bit of competition from Chinese dairy companies now. That's another story. But is it a money thing only, or do you actually have to be a name as well? Because
I
this
think
is
it's,
this is a great way of leveraging high-end business networks, where you can say, well, if you're in the elite club, you can come and sit, and you might see Rod Jury, or you could talk with this other guy and do business, and it's more than just how much you spend.
but there again, well, I think it's a mixture. So, but there again, if you're in the elite club, you probably know each other anyway. If there's only 100 of you in the elite club, you probably go to the same
It's like,
party.
oh, not you again.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
I think I'll go back to the Koru Club. This is more people I haven't seen
Yeah.
before.
Go and slum it with the peasants.
Yeah, which is hardly peasant, but...
No.
So do we know what Air New Zealand elite members get for
Well,
their
apparently-
elite status?
Well, somebody said in the newspaper report that it isn't as flash as you might imagine, and that it's mainly around a concierge service and individual attention.
Well, what's individual attention?
Well, basically, you get if there's less than 100 of them, it's highly unlikely that there's going to be very many in the lounge at once. So basically, you have staff members at your beck and call. But really, what else could they do? I'm sure these people are more than capable of getting their own wine or dialing their own phone.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's sort of anti-New Zealand. It's not egalitarian, is it? It's not what
No.
we do here.
No, yes, indeed. It is the opposite, in fact.
It'll be interesting to see how they'll play it down, won't they? They won't want to talk about it too much, but, it might just get the talkback lines going, and it might just give them a little bit of a hit in their 75th year.
Well, there's nothing to talk about, Paul, because officially nobody knows anything about it. It's a secret.
It's like black ops.
Yeah.
Well, they got people who talk into their collar when an elite person is arriving.
Yeah, and they just come in and they disappear into the cleaning cupboard and push through the cleaning cupboard, and it's a whole other world out there.
Through the cleaning
Yeah.
or to the baggage hole or something like that.
Yeah, it's like Narnia.
Yeah, or
Push
platform, whatever it is, and a half on the
Yeah.
Harry Potter. Yeah. All right, well, that's interesting. I think I can confidently predict that you and I probably will never experience Air New Zealand Elite or Platinum Elite or whatever it's called.
I think we might want to experience if we ever took that new Philippine Airlines flight from Manila to Auckland via Cairns, which is, I think the first leg's 6 hours in an A320 overnight, and then the next leg's 7 hours in an A320, depending on which way you're going. So you leave Manila late in the evening, you get into Cairns at 6:30 in the morning, you leave Cairns at 8 in the morning and get into Auckland sometime in the afternoon.
Well, that's not too bad.
Oh, that overnight on an A320, then a couple of hours in Cairns would be a bit of a nightmare.
Sorry, I thought you said A330. A320?
Yes, it's an A320. It's a 150-seat A320.
Oh, I missed that bit. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Narrow body, yeah. What? And then they send the A320 over to here?
Yeah, it goes Cairns, Auckland.
So Manila to Auckland in an A320?
Yeah, with a stop in Cairns, 2 hours in
Crikey.
Cairns.
Crikey.
I mean, it's quite nice for. I mean, whichever way you look at it, it's an interesting use of the plane because it does give Aucklanders a one-stop. Well, they could go via Melbourne and pick up a big plane, but if you want, it gives Aucklanders a way to get, or New Zealanders a way to get to Cairns and back, which is not available at the moment.
Yeah.
And if you did need to push on to the Philippines, you spend a night in Cairns and move on to the Philippines.
Where do Philippines fly to? They've got what, 777s and A330s, I think.
A330s, yeah, they fly to Melbourne. I think they fly to Brisbane. Not sure about Sydney.
But in terms of further out into the world, I know they go to LA. I've seen them at LA.
Yeah, they go to the States, and I think they go to Europe. But I think they go to London.
Yeah,
I think they go to like Rome or somewhere like that as well.
They'd be pretty cheap, wouldn't they?
Well, it would be cheap because they're in their A330s, or not the international ones they use on the big trips, but on sort of regional A330s, they get nearly 500 people into them.
Crikey.
They've got they've got like 30-inch seat pitch, 9 across.
So 150 seats, not too many to fill.
No.
Gosh, that's a long way though, Manila to Auckland. I know it's via Australia, but it's still a long way.
Depending on which aircraft they use, both of their A320 configurations have about 150 seats. But the one has, I presume the one they're going to be using to Auckland has, I think, 8 semi-lie flat business seats, which,
Right.
it wouldn't be too bad if you get one of those.
I guess, given the route and where it is in the world, that probably most of it's over land anyway, isn't it?
Well, island hopping, yeah.
Island hopping within the over water range of the Twin, you know?
Once you leave Cairns, not a lot of land.
No, that's true. Yeah. Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that goes. If it's really successful, they'll have to put on a bigger aircraft, wouldn't they?
Yeah, chuck an A330 on. And my mistake, it's not the Air Philippines A330s that have the massive capacity. It's that other Philippine airline, and I can't remember what it's called.
Oh, Cebu, is it?
Is it Cebu?
Cebu? Is that how it's spelled? I think it's Cebu, yeah. But still, that's really impressive for a twin. That's really cramming them, and it's like the old Japanese 747 short-range days, where they had almost 600 in those.
I think they're saying that I'll look it up what the actual capacity is, but I think someone was saying they get more people in their A330s than a lot of airlines get in their A380s.
Yeah, there you go. Mind you, it's early days for that. Speaking of carriers in that part of the world, I mean, we're so well aware of the 2 crashes of Malaysian, and we always wondered what that would do to their business and, how badly is the brand damaged. And you've picked up a few things in your travels that sounds like they're going to do something pretty major. What have you heard?
Yes, well, apparently, according to a member of the flight crew of a Malaysian Airlines plane that was overnighting in Brisbane recently, a friend of mine got speaking to them, and this is what they said, that this week, or the end of the month, so it could be the 1st of June,
right. Yeah.
They are completely rebranding. They are officially announcing again that they're selling all of their A380s, or trying to get rid of all of their A380s, some of their older 777s. And all staff members have to reapply for their jobs, and they want to lose about a third of their staff. The staff is 6,000 air staff, flying staff. In total, it's 20,000. And he wants to get rid of a third of 20,000. So it's going to be closer to 6,000 people, 7,000.
I wonder how you do it in a place like Malaysia. Would you have to pay redundancy, or do they have those sorts of labour deals?
They'll have some. This person was talking about there's going to be reschooling.
Reschooling?
You can go off and do training.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a serious amount of people you got to absorb.
There's a lot. But they should have done it years ago. I mean, they've wasted a lot of money. I mean, apart from the losses, but losing the planes, which was most unfortunate. But they've wasted an awful lot of money trying to compete with Singapore Airlines.
Yeah, well, they haven't succeeded there, have they?
No, they haven't. They haven't.
So they're shrinking their capacity, getting rid of some of the old 777s. Would that be just for efficiency, or because they don't want aircraft that look like the ones that crashed?
It's just to reduce costs. So anything that's a bit old, they're getting rid of. They're basically going to come be an A330 airline. Some of the new 300 ERs they'll be keeping. But, get rid of as many planes as possible.
Gosh,
and
that's
barely curtail their route network.
That's a radical move to completely rebrand. Is that what's being talked about?
Yeah, new name, new colours, new everything.
Oh, gee.
And the capacity of the Cebu Pacific A330-300, it's 436.
Yeah, that airline's certainly grown in size in the last 5 or so years, because I think they all were narrow body for a long time.
Yes.
Okay, so watch out for that. Well, there'll be some publicity on that shortly. If they're going to be rebranding, it'll be a global rebrand, won't it? Or will they start in Malaysia? No,
it's a complete rebranding, everything. Talking about Malaysian Airlines, there's one of the researchers working on the MH370, the missing plane, is apparently pretty convinced it's in the Bay of Bengal. As the Russians said quite early on in the piece, they said they'd located something at sort of submerged 50 feet under the Bay of Bengal, but it hasn't been looked at yet. He's convinced that's the plane.
Oh, okay.
And a long theory as to why he's convinced and blah, blah, blah. But
so is that where it would have been on the flight path? No. Or it's in the area, isn't it? They were heading that way.
Well, it's off to the left. It'd be a few hundred miles to the left of where they would have gone, because they were on their way to China. So this is still heading north, but left instead of right.
Wow. Okay. Well, it's about time that was found. Speaking of crashes, anything new on the Airbus A400 military freighter crash?
No. So what we know so far is that the plane took off. It was very low. They think 3 engines cut out. The other engine was, of course, a takeoff power that caused the plane to bank.
Of course, yeah.
And they did get the 3 engines restarted, but they were too low and they hit the ground. Now, it was a test flight for Turkish military. The only thing that's been said that I can find out so far is that it was a software fault. And then there was an interesting line after that, due to possibly incorrectly installed software.
Oh.
I wonder, it being a test flight, whether or not they had test rigs hooked up to the plane to monitor the flight characteristics. And you just wonder whether the test system might have interfered with the operation of the plane, or there was a test routine running, and one of the things was to do something with the engines that you only operate on the ground. Very interesting. I'd be very, very interested to see what happens when they release more info on that, because it would not surprise me at all if it was a testing problem.
So not really related to the production and normal operation of the aircraft. It's sort of brought about by the conditions imposed by being in a testing regime.
It wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Well, that's where those sorts of the odds of something like that happening are increased in those flying in that way, because you're outside the normal envelope, aren't you?
It's unusual, yeah. So that wouldn't surprise me. But I'm sure they'll release something relatively soon. And what I find quite interesting is everyone's grounded theirs, except the French.
Well, don't want to show any sign of any lack of confidence.
Yeah, their military's still using them.
Yeah, well, usually that's a sign that it's pretty well understood what the problem could be.
Although there was a recent 777 incident. Air France has a lot of sort of, for a major airline, for a major country, they're more often in the news than many other.
Yes.
And this time it was a 777 flying too close to mountains. Oh. Apparently it's very close to mountains.
What, like extremely close?
Yeah, they didn't know where the hell they were.
Gosh.
Yeah.
They don't wash their planes often?
They don't wash their planes, no.
Okay.
So interesting. Now, another story which is causing a lot of consternation over here in Australia is the current government putting forward a plan to allow non-Australian airlines to offer domestic services in any location north of the Tropic of Capricorn. So sort of Port Hedland to Darwin and this type of thing.
Is that because the air services are lacking?
Yeah, so they're thinking of, that would be an ideal sort of Cebu Pacific could pop over and do do all the top end.
I flew into Port Hedland once on a 727 freighter at 2:30 in the morning.
Oh, yeah?
2 memorable things. First, there was a kangaroo on the runway when we were lining up to take off. And second, it was 32 degrees at 2:30 in the morning.
Wow.
And I don't know how they exist up there. But there was an F-27 sitting there, and that was going to take the newspapers that we had on board and fly them to Broome, and I think on to Darwin.
Wow.
So there was a bit of a distribution centre there. I'm not surprised that there's not that much passenger traffic up there. I mean, you're right out at the edge there, aren't you?
Well, the federal government's saying the reason there's not much passenger traffic up there is because the major airlines in Australia don't fly up there.
Yeah, but they would if there was a market.
Well, they're saying they don't. The government's kind of saying, well, there's not enough competition, and they've both sort of informally colluding not to create the market because it would cost them too much money, or they're just not interested. So they're thinking if we could let foreign airlines in up there, it would all be good. It brings back interesting times, because back in the 60s, at Darwin, the runway was too short to accommodate the jets that Qantas had just bought.
Yeah, 707s, yeah.
So British Airways, because they flew the Comet 4, they used to offer an internal service. They'd fly Essendon, a very short runway in Essendon to Darwin, and as a domestic service, and then go on one of the Empire runs. And they're in
the Comet 4, gee.
Yeah, because it had the very short takeoff capability. And the Air India was allowed to offer a domestic service from Brisbane to Perth before heading off to India.
Oh, okay. So it sort of just covered off because they flew there that way anyway, I guess, to...
Yeah.
Yeah, Air India's been in and out of Perth for a long time.
So they were allowed to sell domestic tickets.
Yeah, the Comet 4 actually used to come to Auckland for Nuapai as well.
Yeah. Apparently, it could take off from Essendon and climb straight to 40,000 feet.
That's amazing, because Essendon, I think, is only about 5,500 or 5,800.
Yeah. So take off straight to 40,000 feet with 95 passengers.
Not bad.
Non-stop.
And what was it, the Rolls-Royce Avon on that one, wasn't it?
I think it was the Avon, yes, in the 4.
It was the Ghost originally. I don't think it was the Avon for that.
And they incredibly light. You know, when compared to the 707, obviously they were smaller.
Can you imagine what it must have been like on even like a 12 or 13,000 foot runway on a hot day in one of those early 707 turbojet powered things, fully loaded? Man, it would you'd be watching the end of that runway just keep coming and coming closer and closer. I mean, they literally we're using 12, 13,000 foot of the runway just to get off.
In Johannesburg, which is very hot and very high, and in Windhoek, which is just very hot and reasonably high, the 707s and the early 74s the departures were always planned for very late at night when it was coolest.
Right.
But it wasn't unusual, especially in Windhoek for the 707s and Johannesburg for the 74s. They'd leave for Europe at 11:30 at night. And depending on the temperature, sometimes they'd go and sit down the end of the runway for an hour and a half until the temperature dropped enough to let them take off.
Gosh.
Yeah.
And
but they
fingers crossed, eh?
They had to leave the gate because there was a curfew.
All right, so you're away from the gate, you're within the curfew, but if you're still hooked up, yeah.
You're still technically taxiing.
Yeah. Well, I remember ages ago when I was flying around on that freighter that talked about going up to Port Hedland. Yeah, I think it would have been right in the middle of the summer in Perth there, so it got pretty hot. And on one of the nights that we departed for Melbourne, we used about 11,000 feet, and that was a 727 fully loaded with cargo. That's my point. It just goes on and on and on and on and ba-boom, ba-boom, almost a minute.
But once it gets off, it's pretty sprightly then, right? It does.
Once it gets into the air, but it's just that getting into the air, but the first 10, 20, 30 feet, with the temperature and the weight and everything. And I think on that occasion, they had pretty well, not landing flap, but a lot of flap out too,
I think that's what I noticed. If you ask me, today and when I was flying as a kid, like taking off from Singapore the other day, it was 32 degrees and we shot off like a scalded cat.
Yeah.
Interesting, as leaving Singapore, looking out of the window as we turned at the end of the runway, there was a white A330 stripped of all Singapore livery. And they're adding new A330s to the fleet as they get rid of A330s that are less than 5 years old.
Crikey.
The lease rate on the 5-year-old A330 will double. So they're getting rid of 3 this year and they're taking 3 new ones this year.
There you go. That's how you do it.
Yeah.
All right. No time for an aircraft of the day or week or whatever. We'll do that next time. We'll try and think of one and see what's in the news and look forward to that. But in the meantime, we're out of time. Again, Martin, Paul Brennan here in Wellington and...
Martin Noakes here in Toorak.
We'll see you later.
Yes.